Now to South Sudan, a country that gained independence just in 2011 after a long and brutal war with Sudan. But in recent years, South Sudan has been torn apart by a bitter civil war of its own, which has affected millions of people. Today, the two long-standing rival leaders in South Sudan are meeting face to face for the first time in 2 years, in a renewed attempt to end the bloodshed. President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar are in neighboring Ethiopia for talks which are being brokered by regional leaders. Mr. Machar flew into Addis Ababa from South Africa, where he's been living under house arrest. Well, for more on this story, I'm joined now live from our studios in London by the African Affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, John Ofei Ansah. And John, tell us how optimistic anyone can be about this meeting, because we've had talks before. I mean, we've had so-called ceasefire deals and they don't seem to have lasted. I mean, is this looking any more optimistic than previous ones, perhaps because the two leaders are actually getting together face to face?
Yes, I'm cautiously optimistic. Why? Because the convener of the talks, who is the new Ethiopian Prime Minister Ahmed Abiy, who is mediating the talks in Addis Ababa. It's a reformist. I mean, since he became Prime Minister about a month or two ago, he's showed the example. He started making some reforms within his country, and the most importantly, smoked the peace pipe with Ethiopia's long-term enemy, neighboring Eritrea, even making some concessions. So it's like, look, I have put my house in order. Peace, I've been able to smoke peace with my neighbor. So why can't you do the same? And I believe that there is reason for one to be optimistic, but that optimism must be tempered with a bit of caution because of the intransigence, of the two protagonists, President Kiir and ex Vice President Riek Machar.
And do we know how the two men were persuaded to come to this meeting?
The Ethiopian Prime Minister, in his role as the chairman of the regional bloc, the Intergovernmental Authority of Development, IGAD, actually spoke to the two parties, President Kiir and Riek Machar, to come together. So I believe that he actually is trying to broker the latest, step in the peace talks.
And I understand that regional leaders are proposing the formation of a coalition government as a way forward, which would see Riek Machar back in his old position as vice president. I mean, can you see his bitter rival, President Kiir, accepting such a compromise? He
actually is negotiating now from a position of weakness. President Kiir, has no incentive to offer too many concessions to Riek Machar because the Sudanese army, is winning the war anyway, right? And the opposition is so fractured. So that makes Riek Machar, bargain from a weak position. So he has no choice but to accept, whatever deal that is put or compromise that is put before them. And again, there were talks between the sort of a ministerial discussion, a negotiation before this, can I say, summit? Okay, and they are agreed, in general, in principle, on the modalities, or the sharing of government positions, the cabinet, even increasing the number of parliamentarians in parliament from 400 to 700, and allocating 30% to the opposition. And again, when it comes to the state governments too, there are deals being, negotiated. So I believe Look, Riek Machar now has no choice, and he's again negotiating from a weak position, so he has to play ball with what the mediators put before the table.
And John, we don't always get to cover South Sudan perhaps as forensically as we should. Is the fighting there continuing, or have things quietened down?
The fighting, has spread across the country, and I mean displaced hundreds of thousands of people. Actually, it has caused, the biggest refugee problem since the Rwanda genocide of 1994. The fighting is still continuing, and atrocities, human rights, abuses are being committed all over the place. So much so that even the UN, Security Council, has given the two leaders, President Kiir and Riek Machar, up to the end of June to come up with a peaceful solution. Otherwise, they will face sanctions. And again, the US, which backed South Sudan in its war of independence against Sudan, Khartoum, right, has also threatened to impose sanctions, right, on the South Sudanese government, and also sanction other 6 leading figures in the government, including the defense minister. So the fighting is going on. Yes, it is going on, but it is so much so that they need to come to a peace agreement, a lasting peace agreement to end this bloodshed.
So do we have any idea, John, when we might know if anything positive has emerged from this meeting? Do we know how long they're going to be in Addis Ababa?
Well, from where I'm sitting, from my experience, I think because of I mentioned intransigence, both leaders, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, are two very, very stubborn, intransigent people. So I believe the talks could drag on maybe till the end of this week, hopefully. That's my take on it.
Well, John, you've put it in very clear perspective for us. And as you said, the UN Security Council has been discussing an arms embargo and targeted sanctions against individuals if this latest round of talks fail. John Ofe-Ansah is, of course, the publisher of Africa Briefing and the African Affairs analyst, and he joined us live there from our studios in London.